I'm Marcus Walker, a 32-year-old guy whose life took a dark turn 9 years ago when my own family kicked me out onto the street, judging me as nothing more than a useless high school graduate. Just last month, I found myself in a lavish, gilded ballroom, watching their carefully built world crumble into 1,000 shards right before their eyes, completely unaware of who I had become. Before I tell you how one simple announcement from the stage delivered the kind of poetic justice I'd stopped hoping for long ago, do me a favor and drop a comment below to let me know where in the world you're tuning in from. It's always pretty wild to see how far these stories can reach. Anyway, let's get right into it. The scene of this whole showdown was the annual Whitmore Foundation Charity Gala. Picture a room straight out of a movie, high ceilings with glittering crystal chandeliers hanging down, the air thick with the scents of expensive perfume and fresh flowers, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses constantly echoing through the space. It was exactly the kind of place my parents always dreamed of belonging to, a world full of power, influence, and old money, which they admired from the cheap seats. My wife, Dr. Claire Whitmore, who's insanely smart, and I were there as honored guests. Her family's foundation was hosting, and my company, Nutrier Medical, was one of the main sponsors for that night's events. I was just coming back from the restroom, fixing my bow tie that still felt strange on me when a voice sliced through the polite chatter like ice through water. It was a voice that sent a chill down my spine, a voice I could recognize from a million others because it had haunted every nightmare I had as a kid. "Charles, for God's sake, look," my mother Linda whispered harshly to my father, her tone sharp and venomous. "Why is that failure even here? Honestly, he's polluting the whole event just by breathing the same air." A familiar heat rose to my neck, and I clenched my jaw tight. For one dizzy moment, I wasn't a 32-year-old CEO, I was back at 17, standing frozen in our living room while being told I was worthless, a burden no one wanted. "Just ignore him," my father Charles muttered under his breath, already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. He probably thought I was working for the catering staff or something. "Don't make a scene." But my younger brother Ryan always loved causing trouble, especially when I was the center of attention. He strode toward me with that smug look on his face, perfectly handsome and full of superiority. He'd always been the golden boy, the prodigy of the family, while I was just the leftover, the mistake. Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said loudly enough for some people nearby in fancy gowns to turn and look. "Shouldn't you be in the kitchen, big brother? Or did you sneak in just for a free meal?" I looked him over, the tailored suit he wore perfectly pressed, his arrogant tilt of the head, and felt that old anger bubbling up again. But it wasn't the same raw fury I once carried, now it was a cold calmness I'd spent 9 years building. I let a small, tight smile curl at my lips. "The world's a small place, Ryan," I said evenly. "And I'm here for a very different reason than you are." Just then, 2 more people joined our tense little circle. One was Ryan's fiancé, Dr. Nathan Clark, a slick surgeon with a confident look, and the other was a stern woman I instantly recognized as Dr. Brenda Sterling, Chief of Medicine at University Hospital, and more importantly, Dr. Clark's boss. Dr. Sterling looked at me with polite curiosity, but Dr. Clark's face went ghostly white, like he'd seen a ghost at his own coronation. My father scowled, clearly annoyed by Ryan's stunt. They had no idea what was really going on, they were so full of their own arrogance, judging the boy I used to be without ever knowing who I truly am now. They didn't realize my company's products were used at Dr. Sterling's hospital or that Dr. Clark's career was hanging by a single invisible thread, a thread I didn't even know I was holding until that moment. Suddenly, the announcer's smooth voice boomed across the ballroom, calling Dr. Clark onto the stage to accept his award as the rising star in medicine. My family puffed up with pride, faces glowing with what they saw as their own victory as they watched their golden boy walk toward the spotlight, completely unaware that he was walking right into a trap he couldn't see coming and that everything they wanted to impress, their world of power, was about to see them fall from grace in spectacular fashion. As Dr. Nathan Clark stepped up to receive his award amid polite applause, Claire appeared beside me, her presence warm and steady amid all that icy history behind me. She didn't say anything at first, she just reached out and took my hand firmly, giving me that quiet reassurance I needed to hold on to myself. "Marcus, are you alright?" She whispered softly, her honey-colored eyes searching mine for any sign of weakness. "We could leave right this second, just walk out that door and never look back, if you'd only say the word." I looked at her, seeing the fierce loyalty carved into her beautiful face. It was a love I'd once thought I didn't deserve at all. Just her standing there, ready to fight for me, was enough to wipe out the last traces of fear I carried in my heart. I squeezed her hand gently in return. "No," I whispered, my voice steady but quiet. "I'm not running anymore. Let's stay." My mother, Linda, must have caught the exchange. She saw this graceful, strong, stunning woman standing beside me, and her face twisted into a new kind of contempt, a venomous expression that already oozed disdain. Insulting me wasn't enough, she had to try tearing down anything good in my life. "Oh, look. He's finally found some poor girl to cling to," she sneered to my father, her voice dripping with a casual cruelty that still managed to shock me. "He was always defective, never able to handle things on his own. Probably fed her some sob story about a tragic childhood just to earn her sympathy." Defective, that word hit me like a punch in the gut. The grand ballroom, shimmering chandeliers, and soft music all blurred into a distant hum. Suddenly, I was 10 again. Standing on the cold linoleum of our kitchen floor, surrounded by shards of a broken blue ceramic plate, my mother's favorite, that lay scattered around my worn-out sneakers. I'd been trying to help clear the table after dinner, hoping for just a small bit of praise. But Ryan had accidentally bumped into me as he ran past, causing the plate to crash to the ground. It was my fault. Always my fault in this house. I remember my mother's face then, not contorted with rage like I'd feared, but with a mask of cold, exhausted disappointment. She didn't yell, she rarely did. Yelling would have meant I was worth some energy. Instead, she grabbed my arm, her long nails digging into my thin bicep, and dragged me out through the back door into the dark little storage shed that leaned against our garage. Inside, the air was thick and stifling, a mix of old paint fumes, gasoline, and damp earth. Spiders had spun dusty webs in every corner. "You'll stay in here and think about what you did," she said emotionlessly. "Maybe a few hours in the dark will fix what's wrong with you. You're just a defective kid, Marcus." The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into near darkness. I heard the iron bolt slide across on the outside, locking me in. Alone in that suffocating blackness, the word echoed over and over, defective. 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 I didn't cry. By age 10, I'd already learned tears only made things worse, they were a sign of weakness, another flaw to carry. So I just sat on the cold concrete floor, hugging my knees tight to make myself as small as possible, like if I could just disappear entirely. Then suddenly, a sharp nudge from Ryan jolted me back into the present. He was standing next to my father now, wearing a triumphant sneer on his face. "Still silent, huh? Cat got your tongue? Or is there just nothing happening in that empty head of yours?" My father, Charles, spoke up in a low, dismissive growl. "What do you expect, Ryan? The kid barely made it through high school. A guy without college isn't going to have much to say in a place like this. He should be grateful they even let him in the door. No college degree, that was all it took to wipe me from the scene entirely, and suddenly I was back again, pulled out of the fancy gala and thrown into my past. I was 17, sitting at our polished mahogany dining table at home. Hidden beneath my mattress, like forbidden treasure, were 3 college acceptance letters. One was from Westfield University and came with a partial scholarship. I felt so proud, so scared, so ridiculously hopeful that maybe this was finally my shot, my way out, my chance to finally be seen for who I am. I called a family meeting, something they usually reserve for punishments, and nervously laid the letters on the table. My voice trembled as I shared them. My father grabbed the Westfield letter, glanced at it with a sneer, and then tossed it aside like junk mail. Partial scholarship, that felt like an insult. They probably thought I wasn't worth much at all. He didn't even acknowledge the acceptance itself. College? Don't make me laugh, Marcus. We're not wasting money on you. You're not smart enough for that. But Dad, I can work, I can get loans, the scholarship covers nearly half of it, I swear, listen to me. My mother cut in sharply, her tone cold and sharp as breaking glass. This discussion is over. We won't hear any more about it. You're a high school graduate, nothing more, and that's all you'll ever be. You'll start working full-time the week after graduation, and you'll hand over your paycheck to us because you owe us. It's about time you began paying us back for the heavy burden of raising someone as unlucky as you. The word hung heavily in the air between us, unlucky. It was worse than just defective, it felt like a final verdict on my very soul. Ryan, then just a skinny 12-year-old, looked up from his comic book with a false sense of innocence. I'm going to be a doctor like Dad, he announced confidently. I'll study hard and work for my big brother's share, too. Oh, Ryan, what a noble and admirable thing to say, my mother cooed, her face softening into a smile as she beamed at him. Yes, you be the success in this family. Let your brother serve as an example of what not to become. In that moment, my world, so full of possibilities just minutes earlier, shattered into pieces. All the hope I had carefully stored away was suddenly snuffed out. The next morning, I found my acceptance letters torn in half and discarded neatly in the trash can in the kitchen. That night, lying in bed and listening to my family watching TV together without me, a new feeling ignited deep in my stomach. It wasn't sadness anymore, it was rage, cold, silent, calculated anger simmering inside me. I quietly reached for my old, battered phone from the nightstand, turned on the voice recorder, and slipped it under my bed. If I couldn't stand up to them openly, I'd gather my own ammunition in secret. Even during those oppressive years, there were tiny flashes of light, glimmers of hope. I remembered Mr. Harris, my high school science teacher, staying after class with me for an hour to discuss my project on nutritional supplements for hospital patients. You have a brilliant, curious mind, Marcus, he told me, his eyes shining with pride I'd never seen in my own father. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. And then there was Dr. May, an older pediatrician who sometimes worked at my father's clinic. She was quiet but observant, she saw everything. She saw how they praised Ryan for having AB+ blood while ignoring my straight A report card. She couldn't say much without risking her job, but she found ways to slip me advanced biomedical textbooks. Knowledge is power, she'd whisper, pressing a book into my hands when no one was looking. Just you wait, Marcus. Your time will come. Their quiet words of encouragement and their faces, these were the lifelines I clung to in that stormy house. Back at the gala, Claire's hand tightened around mine. She had heard it all, the sneers, the casual insults. Her beautiful face was now a mask of icy fury. I was the one who had endured it firsthand, but she was the one now feeling the righteous anger for me. On stage, Nathan Clark was thanking his mentors and giving a heartfelt shout-out to my father for his guidance and wisdom. Meanwhile, my family soaked up the borrowed glory, completely oblivious. They felt like they were on top of the world. I looked at them and then at Claire. The ghosts of my past weren't just haunting me anymore, they were standing right in front of me, flesh and blood. And for the very first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The 3 years after graduating high school became my wilderness years, blurry days filled with grueling work, endless exhaustion, and tightly kept secrets. My parents had made their position clear, I was their personal ATM and indentured servant. I gave them what they demanded, or rather, I gave them about 80% of what I earned. My life turned into a master class in deception. During the day, I worked as a pharmacy assistant, learning the basics of medication management. At night, I did medical transcription from home, fingers flying across the keyboard until 2 a.m., soaking up the language of diagnoses and procedures. On weekends, I worked at a small health food store run by a kind elderly Japanese woman named Mrs. Takeda. She introduced me to traditional medicinal ingredients, ginseng, turmeric, and taught me about balance and patience in healing. Her quiet wisdom was like a healing balm for my wounded spirit, planting seeds I didn't realize were taking root. From each job, I skimmed a little money, $20 from the pharmacy, $30 from transcription, another $20 from the store, and every week, I carefully smoothed out the crumpled bills and hid them under a loose floorboard beneath my bed. It was slow going, but every dollar saved felt like a small act of rebellion, a brick in building my future freedom. During this period, I found my sanctuary, the university library. I couldn't officially enroll, but I learned that if you walked in carrying a backpack and looked determined enough, no one ever asked for a student ID. I would spend hours there among the quiet hum of students and the smell of old books, devouring medical journals on nutritional biochemistry. I was like a ghost wandering those halls of higher learning. That's also where I met Daniel Reyes. He was a sharp, no-nonsense chemistry student who found me one evening hunched over a complicated paper about protein synthesis. "I've seen you in here quite a bit," he said as he pulled up a chair, "but you're not in any of my classes. What's your story?" For some reason, his straightforward, curious stare made me feel like I could trust him. So, I opened up completely, about the label of being defective, the college ban, and the financial burden I carried. I expected him to feel sorry for me, maybe even look at me with disgust, but instead, his eyes darkened with anger. "Your parents are fools," he said softly but with conviction, "they're sitting on a treasure and treating it like a pile of rocks." Daniel quickly became my first real friend, my first true ally. He saw me not as a victim but as a resource just waiting to be tapped into. When I hit 21, the final breaking point came without warning. Ryan, then just a spoiled 15-year-old, was getting ready for entrance exams to a top-tier prep school. Of course, he was destined for greatness. One evening, he threw his history textbook across the living room with a dramatic sigh and whined to our parents that he couldn't study with me around. He pointed an accusatory finger at me. I was just sitting at the kitchen table reading one of Dr. Chen's textbooks when he complained that my mediocrity was distracting him. "It's like filling the house with failure," he said. Without missing a beat, my mother turned to me, her face set like stone. "He's right. You need to leave for a while. Stay with a friend or something. Ryan needs to focus on his future." My voice sounded hollow when I replied, "I don't have anywhere to go." My father responded coldly, without looking up from his newspaper, "Then figure it out. You're a man now, stop being a burden." That night, they kicked me out with only a backpack of clothes and $50 in my wallet, expecting me to come crawling back within a week, humiliated and begging for forgiveness. They thought I would fail spectacularly. But what they didn't realize was that I already had a plan. Using the secret savings I'd accumulated over 3 years and with the crucial help of my Aunt Caroline, the rebellious sister who had long escaped our family's toxicity, I had already signed a lease on a small, run-down apartment across town 3 months earlier. I didn't crawl back, I vanished from their lives entirely. The first few months were brutal, I was terrified. The silence in that tiny apartment was deafening. I worked 3 jobs, sleeping barely 4 hours each night, living on instant ramen and cheap coffee. Still, I felt free. Every meal I bought, every bill I paid was a bold statement of my independence. A week after leaving home, I got a call that changed everything. It was from Dr. Robert Mason, a respected doctor who used to consult at my father's clinic. He had always been kind and understood the ugly dynamic in our family, just like Dr. May. His voice was gruff but warm as he said, "I heard what happened, Marcus. Your parents are complete idiots. I have an opening for a research assistant at my lab, nothing glamorous, mostly cleaning and data entry, but it's a start. I value talent over pedigree. The job's yours if you want it." That opportunity was my lifeline. Dr. Mason became my mentor, he recognized my hunger to learn and my relentless work ethic. He let me use the lab after hours to run my own experiments. On my first day, he handed me what seemed like an impossible task, collecting and analyzing a huge mess of data from a failed experiment, something he expected would take me a week. I stayed awake 2 nights straight, fueled by coffee and determination, and handed him a detailed color-coded report in just 36 hours. He just grunted, but I caught a flicker of respect in his eyes. He then wrote me a recommendation letter that, combined with my savings and Daniel's help navigating all those application forms, got me into Westfield University. At that point, I was officially in college. It wasn't easy. I was older than most students and constantly felt like an outsider. While they went to parties, I spent nights in the lab. While their parents paid for their tuition, I worked nights just to afford mine. But I was driven by something they couldn't understand. I wasn't just after a degree, I was shaping a new identity for myself. It was during my sophomore year that I met Claire. She was an outstanding medical student 5 years ahead of me, a resident guest lecturing in one of my advanced biology classes. She was brilliant, caring, and saw more in me than just the tired student overworked beyond his limits. We connected over our shared passion for innovative medical breakthroughs. I vividly remember our first real conversation in a campus coffee shop. I was sketching ideas for a nutrient formula that could speed up tissue repair when she didn't just listen, she challenged me, questioned my assumptions, and added 3 brilliant ideas of her own. When I finally gathered the courage to tell her my story, she didn't blink or flinch, she just listened carefully. Most people would have been broken by that mark, she told me, her eyes shining with a fierce admiration that made me feel small. But you've taken all that pain and turned it into a reason to keep going. Her faith in me was the last piece I needed to complete the puzzle. With Claire's encouragement and Daniel's partnership, I took the research I'd been pouring myself into and turned it into a groundbreaking line of medical nutrition products. Nutria Medical didn't get started in some fancy office with a big conference table, it was born in my tiny apartment kitchen, where Daniel and I spent nights arguing over chemical formulas until dawn. I remember that part clearly, almost painfully so. To get our product off the ground, we had to pitch it to hospitals for clinical trials. We managed to secure a meeting with the research and development team at University Hospital. We were nervous as hell but confident in our science. We laid out our data, projections, and passion. One doctor on that committee was especially dismissive. He was young, arrogant, and had this look of entitlement about him. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen on the table, and shot down our proposal with a condescending smirk. "This is just derivative at best, guys," he said, showing no faith in its clinical potential. His name was Dr. Nathan Clark. A few months later, we heard through a colleague that he tried to get funding for a product that looked suspiciously similar but was scientifically weaker. The attempt failed, but it told me everything I needed to know about his character. He was just a thief dressed in a white coat. Eventually, we found other sources of funding, including Whitmore General. By the time I finished my master's degree, Daniel and I were co-founders of a rapidly growing company. My success wasn't some lucky break, it had been built over 9 long years of hard work and fire. One night, while cleaning up my digital files, I came across a backup from my first broken laptop stored in the cloud. In a folder full of old emails, I found one from Ryan to a friend, sent years ago when I still clung to a tiny hope that we could be brothers. He was bragging. I remember thinking how easy it was to pay that nerd $500 to take my SATs for me. He wrote, "Dad will never know. I'm golden." Back then, finding that email would have crushed me completely. Now, it was just data, a ghost in the machine, evidence I never knew I had. Claire and I got married a year after I finished my degree. Her parents, Thomas and Ellen Whitmore, were cautious at first, but they judged me by who I was, not by my family name. And in them, I found the kind of loving, supportive parents I'd always wanted but never had. Our son Oliver was born a year later. My life felt full, I had what I needed. My past was like a locked room I'd closed tight and thrown away the key to. I thought I'd left all that behind for good, but I was wrong. Back at the gala, the polite applause for Nathan Clark gradually faded away. He walked off the stage clutching his glass award like a sacred relic and headed straight for our table. My family followed him like an honor guard, their faces lit up with triumph. They were coming to gloat, to rub their victory in our faces after all the family failures they thought we represented. Then Ryan started speaking, his eyes flicking with condescension between Claire and me. "This your date for tonight? Honestly surprised you could even afford a ticket here, let alone buy one for her," he sneered, leaving me speechless for a moment before Claire gracefully extended her hand, not to Ryan, but to his fiancée. "Dr. Clark," she said calmly and steadily as a surgeon's hand, "Claire Whitmore Walker. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." The name Whitmore hung in the air like an electric charge. I saw my mother's eyes flicker with confusion for just a second. She was trying to process what she'd heard, but she was too caught up in her own story to notice. "Well," my father announced loudly, puffing out his chest so much I thought his buttons might pop off, "Dr. Clark just won a pretty prestigious award." His pride was obvious as he added, "He's one of the most promising young surgeons in the country, a real success story, a credit to his family." His gaze shifted coldly to me, dismissive and bored as he looked right through me. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I just nodded slowly while keeping my eyes fixed on Clark. "Yes," I said softly but with deliberate weight, "I'm very familiar with Dr. Clark's work. We've crossed paths before." A flicker of discomfort flashed across Clark's handsome face, his smile tightened as he realized what I meant. He remembered me from that committee meeting years ago, his dismissive attitude, his professional arrogance, even his attempt to steal my idea. Now he was beginning to see that maybe he wasn't the hunter anymore but the prey. This wasn't the victorious moment he'd imagined for himself. The gala's host, a man with a booming theatrical voice, took back the microphone as tension filled the room. "And now," he announced grandly, "for our keynote address and the presentation of the Whitmore Foundation's Visionary in Medicine Award." As he spoke, the atmosphere shifted. This was the main event everyone had been waiting for. This was the award that truly carried weight, the one accompanied by a substantial research grant and the prestige of the Whitmore name. Claire leaned in close, her warm breath brushing against my ear as she whispered, "You know who's giving the keynote and presenting the award, right?" A mischievous glint flickered in her eyes. "Of course, it's Dad, Dr. Thomas Whitmore, my father-in-law, the head of the Whitmore medical empire, who was about to step onto the stage." The quiet tension that had been brewing at our table was about to turn very loud and very public. The stakes for the evening had just been raised exponentially. I let my gaze drift across the lavish ballroom, a swirling crowd of tuxedos and shimmering dresses. My eyes settled on a table nearby the stage, where Dr. May sat elegantly in a deep blue gown, looking composed and refined. Our eyes met briefly amid the throng, and she gave me a subtle, almost secretive nod, a quiet message of support that spanned over 20 years. Someone who had been there from the very beginning was now here to witness the culmination. It all felt fated, like every moment of my life, the good times, the bad ones, and everything ugly in between, was converging in this one room at this exact moment. The house lights dimmed, and a single powerful spotlight shone brightly on the podium. Then, Dr. Thomas Whitmore, a man known for his integrity and respect, someone whose respect I had earned, walked confidently onto the stage. "Good evening," he started, his voice calm but commanding, effortlessly shutting up the noise of 1,000 conversations. "Tonight, we celebrate the future of medicine. We honor those who push boundaries, who persevere through challenges, and who uphold the highest standards of honesty and integrity." My parents and Ryan watched him intently, completely captivated by this man, an embodiment of the world they admired so much. They hung on every word he spoke, unaware that those very words were about to send shockwaves through their world. Thomas eloquently addressed the obstacles faced in today's healthcare landscape, emphasizing how desperately we need disruptive innovations. He explained that true progress often comes from those who faced adversity head-on, from people who see problems differently because they've lived through them from the inside out. He paused, letting his words sink deep into the room's silence. "Tonight," he continued, "our foundation is proud to honor a company, and a man, who embodies that very spirit. He spoke of a personal journey filled with resilience that matched his professional achievements. My heart pounded fiercely in my chest, I could feel the steady beat echoing through me. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment of truth. He then highlighted how his company had revolutionized post-surgical recovery and was transforming how patient nutrition is approached, saving countless lives in hospitals across the country. I noticed Dr. Sterling, Clark's boss, leaning forward with a look of sharp interest and curiosity. Meanwhile, my family remained blissfully unaware, whispering among themselves and glancing around, probably wondering which big-name CEO or pioneering researcher was about to be celebrated tonight. There was no way they'd ever imagine it would be me. The idea didn't even exist in their universe. Thomas Whitmore smiled warmly, a genuine, welcoming smile he'd given me that first night I dined at his house. That smile told me I was finally accepted. It filled me with pride, both personally and professionally, to honor our foundation's most important partner, an innovative leader and someone I am lucky enough to call my son-in-law. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, please join me in welcoming the CEO and founder of Nutrier Medical, Mr. Marcus Walker. The name hit the room like a physical force, a presence that couldn't be ignored. For what felt like forever, silence stretched out in suspension, only the soft hum of air conditioning filled the space. Then, suddenly, the spotlight swung from the stage to me, casting a bright white beam that cut through the darkness of the ballroom and landed directly on our table. Claire and I both rose together in unison as applause started tentatively, first just scattered claps from those who knew me, then grew into a wave as hundreds turned toward us. The large screens beside the stage that had displayed the Whitmore Foundation logo now showed a live HD feed of my face, calm, steady, and expressionless. My family had nowhere to hide from this moment. I wish I could have bottled up the look on their faces during that one lingering second, it was chaos wrapped in stillness. My father, Charles, looked as if he'd been physically struck, his jaw hung open in shock, his face slack with disbelief that quickly twisted into a dark red flush of helpless rage. He shifted his gaze from me to the stage and back again, his mind struggling to accept the harsh reality unfolding before him. My mother, Linda, turned ghostly pale, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief, flickering nervously from me to Claire. The name Claire had uttered earlier suddenly clicked in her mind, Whitmore Walker finally shattered her understanding. She realized this wasn't some innocent girl I'd tricked, this was the key to the Whitmore fortune. And I wasn't the failure she might have thought, I was her husband. But it was Ryan's face that revealed true devastation, his expression, once filled with smug arrogance, vanished instantly, replaced by a sickly greenish shock. It was like watching a primal horror, the look of a man whose entire world was crumbling right in front of his eyes, his sense of worth and superiority being torn down and rewritten right then and there. Dr. Clark looked like he was about to be physically ill, his Rising Star award sitting on the table in front of him now seemed mockingly trivial, a cheap, tin trophy. He sank into his chair, looking suddenly small and insignificant in his expensive suit. As Claire and I made our way along the long aisle between the tables toward the stage, I kept my gaze from them. I didn't need to look, I could feel the intense heat radiating from their collective shock and shame, like walking through a fire that couldn't touch me. When I reached the stage, I shook my father-in-law's hand and accepted the heavy, beautifully crafted glass award. Stepping up to the microphone, my heart was pounding hard against my chest, but when I spoke, my voice was calm and steady as a frozen lake. Thank you, Thomas, I said clearly into the silent hall. Thank you to the Whitmore Foundation. It's a real honor to be here tonight. I kept my speech short and straightforward. I thanked my amazing team, especially my brilliant partner Daniel, who was sitting at a nearby table grinning ear to ear, and most importantly, I thanked my wife. Turning to her as she stood beside the stage, I said, Claire, you're the heart of my life, the foundation of our family, and the brilliant mind that challenges and inspires me every single day. None of this would be possible without you. After the applause settled down, Thomas followed tradition and announced a quick, informal Q&A session. The first person to raise her hand was a sharp-looking journalist from a major medical trade publication. "Mr. Walker, congratulations on your company's meteoric rise," she began. "What would you say was the biggest obstacle you faced in getting your innovative, and some might say disruptive, ideas accepted by the traditional medical community?" That was my moment, the opening I had been waiting for. I looked out over the audience, letting my gaze deliberately drift past the table where Dr. Clark sat frozen next to his boss, Dr. Sterling. "That's an excellent question," I responded thoughtfully. Surprisingly enough, the biggest challenge wasn't the science, it was solid. The data was there. No, the real hurdle was overcoming institutional inertia. It's about pushing past the gatekeepers, those people more interested in protecting their little turf than embracing real progress. I paused briefly before continuing. It's about presenting a new idea to a committee, an idea you've poured your soul into, and having it dismissed as derivative or lacking potential by someone who's done only a fraction of your research. Then I locked eyes with Dr. Clark across the room and added softly, "And the hardest part? Realizing that the very same person who publicly dismissed your work was secretly trying to secure funding for a watered-down, inferior version of your concept behind your back." A ripple of surprised murmurs spread through the crowd. I noticed Dr. Sterling's eyes narrowing into dangerous slits as her gaze flicked from me to a now sweating Nathan Clark. I hadn't mentioned his name directly, but in that moment, I didn't need to. I'd painted an unmistakable target on his back, and his own boss was holding the bow. That was too much for Ryan. His system overload was complete. Seeing me, his flawed older brother, being celebrated as a visionary while his fiancée was being publicly exposed as a fraud shattered whatever last shred of sanity he had left. He shot upright, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor with a jarring echo through the tense silence. "Lies," he yelled, voice cracking with childish fury. "He's a fraud. Don't listen to him. He barely even graduated high school." The room instantly fell into stunned silence again, everyone's eyes turning to my brother. This unhinged man screaming like a lunatic in the middle of a black-tie charity event. Two large security guards moved purposefully toward him, ready to intervene. My father-in-law, Thomas Whitmore, simply raised his hand, a calm, commanding gesture that instantly brought everything to a halt. He leaned back into the microphone, wearing an expression that was almost bored, with a hint of mild disappointment. "For the record," he announced, his voice resonating loudly across the entire ballroom, carrying an unmistakable tone of deadly authority. "Mr. Marcus Walker holds a Master of Science degree in Nutritional Science with top honors from Westfield University and is currently a member of their Graduate Advisory Board. I'm not sure which Marcus Walker you're talking about, young man, but it's definitely not this one." That moment felt like a public execution, quick, clean, and utterly final in its impact. Ryan just stood there, frozen in place, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, with no sound escaping. My mother was frantically trying to pull him down into his seat, her face buried in her hands, overwhelmed with shame. Meanwhile, my father stared blankly into the distance, looking like he had aged 20 years in just 20 seconds. From the stage, on this elevated platform of achievement and respect, I looked at them one last time. But my heart felt nothing but emptiness, no joy, no sense of victorious revenge, just a vast silence that stretched on. The lifelong fight I'd been embroiled in, the desperate struggle to prove I was worthy, had finally come to an end, and I had come out on top. I finished my part on stage with a polite yet firm, "Thank you," then turned back toward my seat. My hand still felt the weight and solidity of the glass award, real and tangible. This time, the applause was thunderous, a genuine standing ovation from a room that finally understood the full scope of what they'd just witnessed. As I made my way back, I caught sight of the final scene of my family's tragedy unfolding before me. They were in chaos, rushing away in panic and humiliation. It was hard to watch. Ryan, his face streaked with tears and blotchy from crying, was being half dragged, half pushed toward a side exit by my mother. In their haste, my father bumped into a small table, knocking a champagne flute to the floor with a loud shatter that echoed unnaturally loud in the now quieted room. He didn't bother to look back. They were like a disorderly retreating army fleeing a battlefield where they'd been completely defeated. The stares and whispers of the city's elite followed them like a trail of smoke. But the real drama, the career-ending blow, was happening at their table. Dr. Brenda Sterling stood over Nathan Clark, who remained seated, looking up at her like a student waiting for his teacher's verdict. Her arms were crossed, her face as hard as stone. She was a woman used to wielding power and was clearly displeased. "Nathan," she said in a low but commanding voice, so cold it could freeze water, "don't bother coming into the hospital tomorrow or ever again. Just have your office cleared out by noon. Send your lawyer my regards." Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away. Alan just stared after her, his face pale as death. His gaze dropped to the Rising Star Award on the table as if it were venomous. His entire career, his identity, was finished. He'd tied himself to the wrong family and been publicly exposed as a fraud in the most humiliating way possible. Claire and I didn't linger much longer. We graciously accepted congratulations from colleagues and friends, but the energy at the event had changed forever. We were now at the center of a swirling storm of gossip. "Shall we go?" Claire asked quietly, and I nodded in agreement, feeling grateful. We left the ballroom behind, stepping out of that charged atmosphere into the calmer silence of the Grand Hotel lobby. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation, keeping my wits sharp and my voice steady, started to fade, leaving behind a dull ache deep inside me. We didn't speak during the elevator ride down to the parking garage or once we got into the car. Silence enveloped us completely, giving space for everything that had just happened to settle in our minds. Outside, the city skyline blurred past the windows, the glowing streaks of gold and red against the dark velvet night sky. I stared out without really seeing it all. The war was over. The ghosts had been driven out. I should have felt victorious or celebrated, I should have been happy, but instead, I just felt exhausted, a weariness so deep it seemed to settle into my bones. I didn't even realize I was crying until Claire's hand gently brushed my cheek, her thumb softly wiping away a hot tear that I hadn't even felt fall. It wasn't a sob, it wasn't a breakdown, it was just a silent tear slipping down my face. A quiet release of 32 years' worth of pain, the feeling of never being enough and fighting just to be seen. It marked the end of a long, painful chapter in my life. Claire didn't say anything or try to cheer me up, she simply removed her hand from my cheek, reached over to the center console, and took my hand in hers, holding on tight. She understood I didn't need words to communicate, I just needed the reassurance that I wasn't alone in the silence. And at that moment, I wasn't. Not anymore. In the weeks that followed, the consequences hit hard and fast, revealing themselves through the gossip of the medical community, a network faster and more vicious than any tabloid. Dr. Clark was, as promised, dismissed from his position. The investigation sparked by my comment at the gala quickly uncovered not only his attempt to steal intellectual property but also a disturbing pattern of exaggerating diagnoses to push unnecessary and costly procedures on vulnerable patients. His medical license was temporarily suspended while a full board review was conducted. His once promising career had crashed down to earth. Meanwhile, my family's clinic, already struggling financially, completely collapsed under the weight of it all. The story of what happened that night at the gala spread like wildfire. Nobody wanted to take their child to a pediatrician who treated his own son with such contempt. Patients started leaving in droves. Desperate, my parents had no choice but to sell the practice for a fraction of what it was worth just to cover their mounting debts. My father, who had poured his entire identity into being Dr. Walker, was forced into an early, shameful retirement. Then there was Ryan. From a solemn phone call with Aunt Caroline, I learned he'd fallen apart after his engagement to Alan was spectacularly shattered. He desperately tried to prove he could do better than me, so he began a reckless affair with the wife of a powerful hospital board member, a desperate move for status and money that backfired horribly. Her husband found out, and the scandal that followed turned Ryan into a social and professional outcast. Broke and desperate, he turned to our parents for help. But in a cruel twist of irony, they disowned him, no longer seeing him as their golden boy, but as yet another disgrace to the family. They had finally found someone they considered a bigger failure than me, and just like they did with me, they cast him aside. The cycle was complete. A year can do a lot, it can turn a battlefield into a peaceful garden. A year after that night at the gala, I found myself on another stage, standing under a bright spotlight at Westfield University, my alma mater. I wasn't there to accept an award, I was giving the commencement speech, looking out at thousands of hopeful young faces in their caps and gowns. For the first time, I felt a deep sense of peace I'd never experienced before. My company was thriving and pushing boundaries. They just launched a new pediatric nutrition line designed specifically for kids with chronic illnesses, which was something very personal to me. My son Oliver was a lively, healthy 5-year-old, full of laughter and endless mischievous questions, reminding me every day that my life was no longer defined by darkness but by the light I was now creating. I didn't mention my family in my speech, I didn't have to. I spoke about resilience, about how your circumstances don't define who you are. I emphasized that your true value isn't determined by people who refuse to see it, it's something you carry inside, like a fire you build yourself. It's a fire fueled by pain but also by hope, a warmth that keeps you alive when everything around you feels cold. That fire is something no one can ever truly put out. Sometimes, ghosts from my past would surface, but they weren't frightening specters haunting my dreams anymore, they were more like distant echoes from a life that now felt foreign to me. Aunt Caroline, who had become like a beloved grandmother figure to Oliver, would sometimes share news during our weekly calls. One Sunday, she told me she heard from a cousin back home, "Your parents sold the house and moved to a small retirement community in some tiny town in Arizona, no one there knows them anymore. He no longer goes by Dr. Walker, now he's just Charles. They're no longer the influential local doctor and his wife, they're anonymous, bitter retirees with fading memories and a legacy of destruction behind them." "And Ryan?" I hesitated before asking. "What's the latest?" Caroline's voice softened as she responded, "Last I heard, he's working as a bartender. His health isn't good, and he's bouncing between cheap apartments, looking much older than he really is. He's living the very kind of life of failure and mediocrity they always tried to push onto me." But the most telling piece of news, the one that finally closed this chapter for me, came in a long handwritten letter from Dr. May. She'd retired to a sunny condo in Florida, but we kept in touch through letters, like people from another time. She wrote that she ran into my mother at a grocery store during a brief visit back to our hometown. She described my mother as looking old, exhausted, defeated, like she'd given up long ago. After some awkward small talk, my mother unexpectedly began talking about her sons, her voice thick with a strange blend of anger and self-pity, as Dr. May described. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, her eyes filling with tears. She admitted how all those years, the money we invested, and the hopes we had for Ryan seemed wasted. He was supposed to be the one, the shining star, but it turned out Marcus had always had what it took. We had backed the wrong horse, Eleanor, completely wrong. Dr. May noted that my mother actually cried, but as she told her story, I saw very clearly that these weren't tears of remorse over her past cruelty or the times she locked that little boy in a shed. No, they were the bitter tears of someone who'd lost a fortune at the gambling table. She wasn't sorry for hurting me, she was sorry she hadn't gained the prestige and wealth her success might have brought her. When I read that letter, a heavy weight I'd carried for years finally lifted from my shoulders. I didn't feel anger or triumph, just a deep sense of closure. Their inability to change or understand no longer mattered, their opinions held no value anymore. The family I built with Claire, my wife, became my entire world. The Blackwell's family had transformed into the loving, supportive parents I'd always deserved. My father-in-law, Thomas, was like a mentor and one of my closest friends, and my mother-in-law, Ellen, was the kind-hearted grandmother Oliver adored. During our noisy, chaotic family dinners, she'd often glance at me with pride and say, "You are a testament, Marcus, a testament to the fact that the family you choose is what truly defines you." Daniel, my partner, was more than just a business co-founder, He was Uncle Vic to Oliver, the guy who taught him how to craft ridiculously complicated Lego models. He, Aunt Caroline, and Dr. May were regular faces at our Thanksgiving table. Our family wasn't bonded by blood but by love, loyalty, and a shared understanding that building a life on your own terms was what really mattered. One evening, months after I got Dr. May's letter, I was sitting in my home office looking over some quarterly reports when Claire came in and wrapped her arms around my shoulders from behind. She rested her chin on my head while peering at the spreadsheets on my screen. "What's got you so deep in thought?" she asked softly. I hesitated before admitting, about that night. I shut my laptop gently. "About them?" she prompted gently. There was a pause before she asked, "Do you ever feel sorry for them?" I took a long moment to answer honestly, thinking about that cold storage shed, the torn-up acceptance letters, all those years of being called worthless. I remembered my mother's bitter tears of regret. Finally, I turned to look up at Claire and said, "No." I shifted in my chair to face her fully and continued, "I don't feel sorry for them, but I also don't hate them anymore. Honestly, I hardly think about them at all now." And that realization hit me. The real victory wasn't in their public downfall or their losing everything, it was in my own quiet indifference. It was the peaceful feeling that comes from knowing deep down that they no longer have any control over me. They're just people I used to know. Tonight, as I tell you all this, my house is quiet, the comforting silence of a safe and happy home surrounds me. Claire's reading in the living room with a steaming cup of tea beside her, and all I hear is the gentle hum of the refrigerator. A few minutes ago, I was doing what I love most, tucking Oliver into bed. He's at that age where his questions are getting bigger and more complicated, sometimes hitting me right in the heart. He was looking at a framed photo on his nightstand from our last family vacation to the coast, a sunny beach scene with me, Claire, and him playing while Thomas and Ellen tried building a sandcastle behind us. "Dad," he asked softly and sleepily, "why don't we see your other grandma and grandpa, the ones you told me about before?" I sat on the edge of his superhero-themed bed, the faint hallway light casting long shadows across his room. How do you explain a lifetime of pain to a 5-year-old who's only ever known unconditional love? How do you keep from revealing the darkness you fought so hard to keep away from his world? I chose my words carefully, wanting to tell him the truth without causing trauma. "Well, buddy," I started gently as I brushed his messy brown hair back from his forehead, "sometimes people, even those who are supposed to be family, can get a little lost along the way. They forget how to be kind sometimes. They forget how to see the good and special things in others, even when those people are right in front of them." He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, so much like Claire's, full of innocent confusion, and I knew I'd do everything I could to protect his heart from the shadows of our past. "But why is that? Why didn't they recognize the good in you, Dad?" I felt that familiar tightness form in my throat, but this time, it wasn't from sadness or anger. Instead, it was a deep, overwhelming love for this little boy, for the incredible safe life I was now able to provide him. You know, for a long time, that question really stuck with me and bothered me a lot. I told him honestly how I felt, but then I learned something truly important: it doesn't really matter why some people fail to see your worth, Oliver. That doesn't make you any less valuable. The only thing that counts is that deep down inside, you truly know your own value, and you spend your life surrounding yourself with family and friends who see it too. People like Grandma Ellen and Grandpa Thomas, Uncle Daniel, and Mommy, they're the ones who lift you up and remind you of your worth every single day. I leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss on his forehead. "And just like you do for me, you remind me what's truly important every single day, kiddo." He offered a sleepy, contented grin as his eyes began to flutter shut. "I love you, Dad," he mumbled softly. "I love you more, buddy," I whispered back, sending those words out into the night sky. I stayed there for a moment after he drifted into sleep, simply watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. My eyes drifted around his room, the colorful, chaotic drawings taped to the walls, the mess of superhero toys scattered on the floor, and the framed picture of our happy, loving family sitting on his nightstand. This was my legacy, not the company, not the awards, not some elaborate revenge at a fancy event. No, it was this little boy sleeping peacefully in a home filled with warmth and unwavering love. This was the life I'd built, not from the ruins of my past, but on a solid foundation of self-worth I had worked so hard to develop. It was the ultimate answer to their insults, the quietest but most meaningful victory I could ever claim. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it struck a chord with you somehow. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to prove your value to people who should have seen it all along? Please share your stories in the comments, I read every one of them. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next.